at it. So here's the issue I had. I had a wheel. I'm going to just draw this kind of like this. I'm not an artist. I don't even play one on TV. This is a gear, and there's the teeth. This is my rendition, and it's a fourth wheel. So it's got a center here like this, and then it's got a couple spokes going out to various parts of the wheel. And then right here you've got the pinion, and there's the pinion with all of its leaves, and you've got a little bit of the shaft, and then you've got the pivot. So that was one side of that wheel. The pivot needs to be redrawn, doesn't it? Anyway, the other side of the wheel had a shaft like this, and then it, at one point in time, had a pivot. Why am I aiming differently here this morning? Anyway, there's the pivot. So a gentleman said to me, "Hey, JD, what I'd like you to do is re-pivot this shaft." So this pivot was broken. So what I did was I took this device and I put it in my lathe. So I had a lathe that, I'm going to reuse this diagram here. So what I had was a lathe dog like that, and the lathe dog had a bunch of holes on it, and one hole perfectly matched the shaft, and then on the other side I grabbed the pinion with a collet, and it was part of the lathe like that. It goes down like this and like this, and this was a spring collet, they're called, but a collet. And then this collet is in the lathe like this. It's getting squeezed by the mouth of the lathe, and so this was able to spin around in a circle like that. And then I had this dog attached to the tailstock, which kind of ran like this. And inside the tailstock I had this little tiny drill, this micro drill, and it was attached to the push rod, or whatever you want to call that thing, like this, and then it had a knob on the end, and I was able to push that this way to put pressure on that to drill this out, right? Well, I drilled and drilled for 3 hours, and finally I had a hole, and then I got a piece of wire, engraved it, and then put that in, and then I tried to rebend it, and it snapped this off. So then, situation 2, what I had was, I had the wheel again. I'm going to draw the wheel a little bit rounder this time. I had the wheel like this, and then I had in the center, I had where the wheel grabs onto the other side, and the other side is where the pinion is, like that, and its leaves kind of drawing through there, and then the shaft and the pivot on the other side like that. And I had it broke off right here, right there. And so my only, after thinking about it for a very long time, so this was supported by, not by that shaft, but by the actual, the wheel kind of was grabbing onto that pinion and supporting the wheel. And there, a lot of them are like that. So the shaft had no part of that whole support structure at all. So I thought, okay, let's chuck this up again. So I chucked it up again, and I drilled this hole. So I drilled this big hole, and the hole was the size of the shaft that I wanted to put in there. So the plan was to take a shaft, drill the hole, put the shaft in the hole like that, and then grave the shaft down after it was in the hole and locked tight in the hole, and then grave that down into a pivot, and I've solved the problem. So the only problem I had then was, let me draw this here, okay, is that here's the upper plate, right, and there's a jewel in there. Let's just draw the jewel right here. There's a jewel right there, and this pivot is 0.24, right, going through that jewel hole, and of course there's a plate on the other side for the watch like that, and another jewel hole with the pivot going through, right? So the problem I had was, this is the second hand and the fourth wheel. So fourth, can I draw a 4 here? And You see, which way would this go? I think this way? Yeah, this way. There, that's the fourth wheel. So this pivot is sticking out through that jewel hole, but I screwed up because I did not make the pivot long enough. And that was my fault when I parted it away. So I had already graved this side down to the right side to fit in this hole. And when I parted it here, I didn't leave enough material to form the pivot, so I was short. So the face of the watch would go like this. And then if you tried to put on the seconds hand, there just wasn't enough pivot left to attach that second hand like this, right? That's the face of the watch here. To attach the second hand to the pivot. This is the seconds hand of the pocket watch. So I need another card, I think. So here's my dilemma. I took this out, I grabbed this with a piece of pliers, and I grabbed this side, and I grabbed this side with a pin vise, and I just turned it and pulled that out, right? It was in tight, but it was tight enough for a second hand, but not tight enough to stay in. So I pulled it out, which is great. Now here's my dilemma. I've got to replace this, right? So I can do a few things here. Thing one is actually, I've got to take this shaft now, take a piece of metal like that, right? And then grave it down. Let's say I grave it down this much, right? Grave it down this much, and then jam it in to the hole that is effectively like this, right? And these are the leaves of the pinion, and the hole is going through that pinion, and then there's the fourth wheel is attached this way. So I take that, I grave this in, I shove it in, I make sure it's long enough, and then I start graving away at the pinion here, or sorry, the shaft here, to turn this into a pivot. So I get rid of this material, and it ends up becoming a pivot on this side. I use the older one that I broke off, because I know that, oh, I made the Tom Brokaw joke again. I used the older one that I broke off, or I de-installed at this point, for the length of this, and all that is good. Leave enough on the end. Now I would have to grab this with a collet, right? Grab this baby with a collet, and then spin it as I create that pivot. That's plan, I'll call that plan A or plan B, whatever. So this thing is going to be spinning around in a circle like this, and I'm graving this down to the pivot size of 0.24, and I make sure it's long enough so the gentleman who owns this, it goes through the plate, through the face, through the jewel face, and leaves just enough pivot on the end for him to clip that off, flush with the face of the watch, and then use this, and then apply the second hand to this pivot, right there. So that's plan A. Now, if I look at what would I do for plan B? Plan B. What's plan B? So plan B is, because this plan makes me attach this shaft to the hole I've already drilled, right, for within the pinion, right? So that's great, but I can't be completely assured that when I grab this again and spin it, that this is going to spin at the right, it's not going to warble back and forth when it's in here. And that's my biggest concern here. So plan B is I take the rod like this, right? And this is blued steel, okay? And I grab that blued steel in a collet, right? That's the right size for the blued steel. I'll just draw my collet like this, right? I grab that in the collet, and and I spin this around. I measure how deep that hole was over here, right? So I just measure that hole, and then I make a mark, and I start graving away at this baby here. So I spin that around, and with my graver, there's my graver handle. What a wonderful looking graver. I start taking material off until this end fits the size of, and I won't draw everything, but this fits the size of that pinion hole, right? That goes all the way through, and it's this deep, right? And there are the arms, the fourth wheel. There's the gear, basically, the wheel part. So I'd spin that, and then after I've done that, I turn that around within the lathe, right? So I go like this, and there's my piece. I flip that around. It's been flipped around, and so the piece that was graved down to the right size is over here, right? There it is there. I grab that piece that I've already graved down. I can grab it beyond there, so I probably want to grab it up here somewhere in the collet, right? So there's my collet, and I'm grabbing it up here so I get a nice pinch in the material. I don't care if I squeeze that or not, but that, in fact, I test fit that in the hole to make sure it actually fits, but I don't smudge it all the way in. Excuse me. I just test fit it. And then they put this in the lathe after it's been test fit. And then the challenge here is I got to measure from here or here when it's in to where the pivot starts, right? And say the pivot starts here, then I got to take material off here, and I have to leave this long enough to do that. Every time I make a video, I got a cough. I don't know what it is. Anyway, so I'm going to have to grave all this material away to 0.24 to make that pivot, and then this A, or upside down A, right? This A has to be the exact length I need for this final. If I look from here, it would be from here to here would be A. So I have that kind of measured already. I know what that is. And then I do a pivot that's extra long to make sure that it goes through the hole and, you know, basically through the jewel and through the and past the plate, right? So the jewel would be here and the plate would be here, and it'd be long enough. So I'm thinking I want to do this technique as opposed to this technique, because this technique here of cutting it and then attaching it and then doing the pivot after might cause a problem if the shaft for this wheel is installed and then I cut the pivot after. I'm just thinking it could screw up. So if I do it this way, I'll know if I screw up right away, and I can just start working on another one without the possibility of ruining the my stupid watch keeps saying things, of ruining the this here. I don't want to grab this pinion again with the collet. I'm just worried about the pinion and its spinning and the health of that wheel. So I think I'm going to do plan A. I'd like your comments on this. This is not a watch video. This is a watchmaker's video. So I'd like your comment on this. Do I do plan A? I'll call that, you know, isolating the rod and doing the rod, then installing it, or plan B is cutting one end and then installing it, right? A or B, that's the choice. So B is grabbing that pinion with the collet and then graving the rod after it's installed into the wheel. Or do I do plan A, which would be just do the rod perfectly and Bob's your uncle. So thanks for watching my video. I'd like some comments on this one. It's an interesting dilemma, and I'll talk to you soon. Bye-bye. Please subscribe to my channel and please like it.